right. Welcome to this week's live office hours. Casey, how's it going, my man?
Good, good. Lots of construction on the apartment today. So I'm coming to you live from my kitchen with the virtual background, but we'll be good. Yeah, excited to jump into it with some folks today.
Nice. Yeah, pumped. So we got AMZ United's coming up next month. So pretty pumped about that. Starting to work on my presentation because I'll be one of the speakers there. It's going to be probably 1,000 people at this conference. I think last year they mentioned they had about 750, and they've been pushing real hard on it. I know a lot of people are pushing it right now, so that's pretty exciting. So I think it'll be really exciting. We sent out an email earlier this week with the discount code on tickets. So if you got that, awesome. Definitely use that. Would love to see everyone there. Our team's going to be there. Half our team's going to be there. We'll have a booth, all that good stuff. I'll be speaking. We'll definitely be at casino night on that Monday. That's going to be really fun. Just kind of kick the things off, just be able to kind of hang out more casually, have some fun, all that good stuff. But yeah, I'm pumped, man. It's going to be pretty awesome.
Yeah, it's always exciting when we can get out and do those live events with folks. I mean, I don't get to do those, or we don't get to do those super often. I know that's been a big focus of ours to try and get out there and get a little bit more FaceTime with folks. So yeah, if you have tickets already, jump in the comments, let us know you'll be there. We'll be excited to see you. And yeah, if you have any topics you want us to cover, maybe Dylan should focus on in his potential speaking or keynote speech or whatever, definitely drop some ideas in there as well.
Yeah, that'd be super helpful as I build out my outline. So I've got a title. Now I just have to fill it out. That's the important part. Now, again, this is open office hours as everybody's in here jumping in. Throw any questions our way, right? We like to geek out with repricing as a whole, Aura as a product. So if you have any questions, how do I do X, Y, or Z in Aura? Definitely post those into chat here so we can dive deep into those, as well as just general selling things, right? Q4 is coming up. We just released a blog post. I think it was earlier this week, basically kind of helping you understand how to strategize going into Q4. And by the way, you should be doing that now, not later. If you're just now starting to look at it, you're not necessarily behind, but the pressure's on. Now we need to start sitting down, mapping out what does our strategy look like? How are we thinking about inventory going into Q4, especially if you're doing wholesale? You need to be placing backdated orders and POs now so that your manufacturers, your brands, distributors, what have you, have enough lead time to get that inventory in. What's terrible is you're ready to place more orders and like, dude, we have nothing. We have 5 units. Sorry. You don't want to find yourself in that position because most of your larger sellers are already placing their Q4 orders today. So definitely want to think about that.
Yeah, like you said, you're not just behind just yet, but definitely now is the time when you want to start looking at those things, setting yourself up for success. If you have any sort of numbers or data around how much product you moved last Q4, it's a great benchmark to use to make kind of intelligent decisions now and smart buys now. So yeah, definitely gearing up for that Q4. I know that tends to be about, 70 to 80% of most people's revenue for the year, depending. So
yeah,
definitely want to make sure you're set up well.
Yeah, it definitely depends. I see anywhere from 60 to 80% of your revenue is done annually just in Q4. Q4 is a great time too, right? Because it's not just the huge, nice margin, stuff like that. That's definitely part of it. But it's also just being able to quickly move stale inventory, right? That you've just been sitting on, struggling to move. So part of your strategy needs to not just be placing new orders. It's also thinking about the bucket of inventory, your segment of inventory that you can take advantage of that massive increase in demand and move those things, get capital back out to redeploy in Q1. I'm going to pull it up here because I forget exactly off the top of my head. Go to this blog post. So in 2023, this is insane. Amazon in Q4 alone did $170 billion in sales with a B, right? So that's your time to shine. That's our Super Bowl, as I like to say. You really want to take advantage of this. I remember my first Q4, I just kind of rode the roller coaster, did not do any pre-planning. Towards kind of my last year of selling is when I really started to take it seriously because, I mean, listen, you can not do anything and still get tons of upside. That's what's cool about it. But you realize how much you're missing out on when you're not preparing, especially on the wholesale front again, because that was kind of my focus. But even RA, right? If you're not RA and OA, I kind of bucket those two together. If you're not looking at taking advantage of the sales that are happening online to be able to then flip over, I think you're just missing out a ton, right? You need to have enough liquid capital to take advantage of inventory buys right now as well. So if you can be moving inventory that is stale to get your capital back, I think you should strongly consider doing that, because you don't want to run out of capital and have so much opportunity that you just can't take advantage of. Again, that's where you'll still do good, but you're maybe operating at 40% of what you're capable of during that period of time.
Yeah, and that's definitely been somewhat of a trend in some of the chats I've helped with or helped folks with recently, kind of focusing a little bit more on that sales velocity, particularly with that older revenue, trying to recoup, maybe you just break even on some items so you can get that capital back for those Q4 buys and restocks now. So
Yeah.
definitely been helping folks tweak some strategies in that sense, be a little bit more aggressive against the competition than they would typically be otherwise. So yeah, I think people are starting to kind of gear up, making sure they have as much cash on hand, getting ready for that Q4 stretch there.
Yeah, exactly. But it's an exciting time. And then you get to kind of take off January and, experience returnary and, and hope, you did pretty well and you don't have too many returns. But this is really where you need to start locking in. So that's why I'm excited about going into AMZ United. It's very wholesale focused. That's what I love. That's kind of my main selling experience is wholesale. And so it's going to be nice to go to a conference that solely focuses on that, because a lot is changing, right? A lot of the dynamics are changing. Even back when I was a seller, Amazon hated Amazon seller or Amazon distributors, brands particularly hated working with Amazon sellers. That will continue to be the case because you have more and more people flooding in as sellers. I forget the numbers, but there's like a few tens of thousands of new seller accounts created every single day. So as wholesale has become, and I've watched this occur over time, wholesale has become more perceptually acceptable, or approachable is the term I should use. And what I mean by that is, back when I was a seller, especially first getting into wholesale, the assumption was you needed tens of thousands of dollars to even get one account. And factually, that's incorrect. But there's been more and more education and more sellers that are public about how they're doing it, like Corey Gainham, stuff like that, which the wholesale challenge kicked off this past Monday. So if you're in that, let us know in the chat. I think it's one of the coolest things ever. People that are willing to jump into wholesale as a business model, I think has increased, which is not a bad thing. Because just because you're doing wholesale doesn't mean you're good at it or actually competing, right? I say this with listings all day, which is, yeah, there's 30 sellers on this listing, but only 3 people are really competing. The others are just kind of sitting stagnant. So what does it matter? Same is also true for wholesale, right? When I was live sourcing, people would kind of make a joke like, oh, could you share your suppliers? And I would kind of clap back and be like, yeah, actually, I will privately, because just because you have the email addresses and just because you have the domains and the products doesn't mean you're, at a skill level where you can actually go and open those accounts, right? It is sales as a skill set and all these different things. You got to understand objections and whatnot. And that is still true today, right? A lot of people are like, oh, I do wholesale. And I'm like, all right, well, walk me through your operations, blah, blah, blah. And you realize they're not really treating it with the respect that I think it requires of you to be able to pull it off. You're not actually, building relationships. You're just sending a ton of emails every single day, which, at least based on my data, you're going to open 10% of the emails you send. Whereas with cold calling, you're going to open 40% if you really get skilled at it. So you're talking a 4x increase in conversion rate, which means you can open up harder accounts, because a lot of accounts, the moment you email, they just delete it. They're like, we don't care. But if you're actually jumping in there, building those relationships, that's now your moat. You know what I mean? That's what I love about it is we're going to go into this conference and hear people who are actively doing this the right way, explaining here's why it's difficult, but here's how to approach it correctly in a way that makes it less difficult. But gone are the days of just, in my opinion, just sending 400 emails a day and be like, I'm going to open up accounts. Like, nah, dude, like take that 400 email list and go cold call all of them over the next few months. And I promise you, you'll have dramatically better accounts that have this moat built around the relationship. And I think that's where this conference is going to really shine, but also data. I'm looking at a few of the other speakers, and a few of the speakers are talking about not just logistics, but how to be data driven. Like Scott Needham's putting this on, and his keynote, if I'm not mistaken, is about making data driven decisions in wholesale. And we've said this for years. You got to be data driven. I've always, said this, and maybe it hasn't registered, but I've always said Amazon sellers need to operate like a software company. The reason why I say that is you need to be thinking through things through data. Like, how are you making decisions? It can't just be, well, my experience. Okay, well, but based on what, right? Like, go show me the data, because a lot of times we're biased and have all these cognitive biases and stuff like that. But when you can dive into the data, really understand what is true, you can now make more effective, efficient decisions that just move the needle, right? You can make far fewer decisions, but you're making them very intentionally. And that's going to be fun, because I've been out the game for a hot minute, obviously, on the wholesale side, but it's going to be cool kind of diving deep into that world, because back when I did wholesale, there was like one course available to it. And I think they started doing conferences towards the end there when I was a seller, but there was not much community related to wholesale. And now it's just far more accessible at an affordable rate, which I think is amazing. A lot of these courses tend to be very expensive, especially for newer people. And when you have higher MOQ, minimum order quantities, it's kind of hard to justify, I'm going to drop $3,000 on this course when I've got $5,000, and then I only have, $2,000 left over to be able to actually purchase inventory. Is that enough? Turns out it is in reality. You just have to operate a little bit differently, but it's gonna be cool. I'm very excited. I'm gonna geek out really, really hard. I'm hoping I don't, while I'm speaking, miss a really, really good presentation that's happening in parallel, because there's 2 stages happening at once. I'm hoping I don't miss anything super cool, but I'm excited. It's gonna be fun. See Scott Needham again in person. Great guy. Chris Skrent's gonna be there, which is gonna be amazing, and a bunch of other people. I was going through some of the speakers. There's a lot of speakers, actually. I'm very impressed by how many speakers they're getting in on one day. I really thought this was going to be a 2-day event, but it's one. So it's going to be action packed. Lots of Celsius that day. That's for sure.
Yeah, we run on caffeine sometimes, but yeah, it's always good to just get some face time. And like we've talked about a lot of times on office hours, like in general, the Amazon space has become much more collaborative and community driven. So it's always good when you can actually get FaceTime with folks who have experience or have a lot of data that leads to better experience or better decisions. And just having access to data leads to just more intelligent purchases on certain times of day, better pricing decisions, and all sorts of things. So kind of starting there and boiling it down will definitely be great for a lot of folks, especially us. We aren't as in the weeds as we used to be. I know Dylan and James used to be a little bit more hands-on in the selling space, but we'll be good to kind of get a refresher on maybe some other best practices or strategies or tips that folks are using.
Yeah, and things evolve, right, as they should. New sellers find new approaches, new tactics. It is cool though, because when I do these lives and webinars and stuff with sellers, especially on the wholesale front, they're like, yeah, I still recommend the Wholesale Made Easy podcast to everybody that jumps into wholesale, which makes me feel grateful, because we wanted that to be really evergreen content, because a lot of what happens on the Amazon world is tactics, short-term tactics. And those definitely have their place. They should be talked about, but you need to have the foundation of the evergreen stuff that will always be true. And so I try to approach things from that perspective, so that, a podcast we recorded 4 years ago is still meaningful now. And we still get downloads every single day, which is incredible to me. I'm blown away. I thought they would just, dwindle to non-existence, but that's not true, which is amazing. But yeah, I'm really pumped. It's going to be awesome. A lot of other sponsors are going to be there that we're now, we have relationships with, so we get to hang out with them, which is really fun. It's just a good time. If you don't do a lot of conferences, I think you should strongly consider at least going to one. The networking there is incredible, and everybody's super open. You meet some amazing people that are doing some very unique, interesting things that you never would have guessed. And they will tell you exactly how to do all of it for free. And that's incredible. Not only obviously the presentations and, the teaching, but just the community, right? To be around other people who just get what you do. They understand the hardships of it. They've experienced the same things as you. And that creates kind of this shared bond where you can immediately go into like some deep stuff that, you otherwise just can't in your day-to-day life in person. Yeah, you can jump on to, Discord groups and stuff like that, and that's awesome, but it is different when you're kind of face to face with somebody. The types of conversations you get to have tend to be a little bit deeper, and just fun, especially when you throw a little bit of alcohol in there. People really open up, especially the shy ones like myself.
Yeah,
so
get some liquor lips going, just a little bit looser and a little bit more free flowing. Yeah, absolutely.
Exactly. So we're going to keep kind of, jamming here. Again, throw your questions into the comment section. We're happy to dive deep into anything you have for us. We like kind of going down different rabbit holes. And if not, we'll geek out with some other stuff. So while we're waiting for those to come through, I recently started playing around with a new AI tool.
Oh, nice.
It is called Email Triager, I think .com. Basically what it does is you connect it to your Gmail, and then it trains on your emails. So how you write emails, and then kind of like we do in Intercom, they have like a documentation knowledge base section. So I can add a bunch of information there that I can reference. And what's cool is every time I get an email that requires a response, it will check all that information and write a draft for me in the way that I write. I've tried a few of these and they've never really written the way I do. This is the first one where I read the first like 2 or 3 drafts. I was like, that's 90% of what I would say and exactly the way I would write it. And I went through some of the code there, and it was like, we always write this way. We don't write this way. So it's like kind of training itself. So it's early days. I'm just kind of playing with this. You know how I am. I just like to play with different things to see what's possible, but it really got the gears churning for like customer support, which is what we do. But, for sellers, right? Seller support, being able to have something to be like, here's our documentation. Here's how we handle X, Y, and Z returns, blah, blah, blah. And then just be like, just write the draft for me. And then all you have to do is jump in and be like, yep, that's good. Nope. Change this, then send it, have that feedback get sent back to the system. So it learns over time. A lot of sellers don't deal with super high volume kind of customer support requests, but your brands on Amazon certainly do. And so that kind of got my gears churning with an idea. I was like, man, that'd be so much fun to work on. But yeah, it's a new model dropped yesterday, which is pretty exciting. New open source model. That's kind of interesting. Meta, so previously Facebook, but Meta's been really pushing on open source models, and they're massive models. It's absolutely insane. I think it's 407 billion parameters. Yeah, it's cool. And it's free, which is like so insane to me that you could just run this on your computer. There's another one I'm playing around with called Super Whisper, where you basically just hit a command and it pulls up a little thing, it listens to you, and then when you're done, it just transcribes it perfectly and pastes it for you. So if I need to, write something out, but I'm like, it's easier for me to just say it. I can pop that up, say it, and then it'll just paste it for me, and it'll make sure it's all correct and different things like that. So that's been kind of fun to play around with, but I don't know, I'm getting kind of, I kind of went through a little AI winter, if you will, where I was like, all right, there's still a lot to do here. It's kind of boring. Like there's a lot of like agentic tools being built, but they're either not available or they just don't really work. And luckily, I think that's starting to change again, which is pretty exciting. There's one called Thought Lead that came up that recently launched, and it's like a sales, more like a receptionist, but it's like you call it, and it handles reception and all that good stuff. It's so insane. See Tony, Jane Bro, Casey, next guy up on MTV Cribs. yes.
That would Casey be cool. Unfortunately, this is a virtual background. You can see my face fade in and out. My kitchen is not that nice. Nice little grand piano. But on the AI writing front, I've always I'm a decent writer in terms of just form and things like that, but I always need like an outline. So I've been using ChatGPT for a while on different things to kind of create an outline, and it's always easier to edit than it is to start from scratch and kind of go from there. So I'll be interested to hear from you on like email. You said email triage or whatever it was?
Yeah, email triager.
Okay. Yeah. I wonder how intelligent and close it gets to your specific style over time as it's able to kind of observe more emails. That'll be interesting.
Yeah. And with minimal training, it was pretty, like I said, it was about 90-ish%, which is pretty impressive.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's pretty cool. Yeah. You bring up something with like the AI stuff, right? And I think I've mentioned this internally to the team, but like, I like using AI to avoid the blank page problem. Right? When we got to write content, or social posts, a lot of times I'm like, I have a general idea of what I want to do, but like I don't have the finalized product, and it's gonna take me forever to like kind of refine it. So instead, what I can do is just throw it in there, be like, give me some ideas. And they're not all great, but there's always one that I'm like, oh, I could riff on it this way. That'd be really cool. And so it just kind of speeds me up and helps me again avoid that blank page problem. And this is true. This is like a generalized problem, right? This is not just writing blog posts and Twitter, posts, but it's also things like listing optimization, right? Like a lot of times you're like, man, I just don't really know how to do this and blah, blah, blah. It's like, well, great. Just give enough context to the AI, to, ChatGPT, Claude, whatever you're using. And it gets you pretty far, right? If it gets you 80% of the way there, great. It did that really, really fast though. And now you just go in and you tweak, you play editor basically. Let's see, Tony. Good news, bad news for me. I started out with Aura early stage. Now I'm over 10K per month average, I guess. So moving to the next plan, can you quickly cover what that includes? More Maven listings, etc. Yes. Great question. So one, congrats on crossing over 10K. That's a huge milestone. So that's amazing. Congrats to you. So every tier, you get more usage of each thing, right? So more workflows, you get more users, you get more marketplaces in a lot of cases, definitely more Maven and more Hyperdrive. So yes, you actually get a lot more usage there, which is amazing. If I remember correctly, hold on.
I think it should be, Tony, I believe you'll go from 5 Hyperdrive listings to 10. And then on the Maven AI front, I believe you go from 50 listings on the early stage to up to 250 on the essential plan. So that's like really the big value swing. You can just put more of your inventory on Maven/Hyperdrive. And just as a refresher, Hyperdrive, we typically recommend on listings where you have a decent amount of competition, just because if there's only 1 or 2 competitors, Hyperdrive will still outpace them, but more advantageous to outpace more or a higher number of sellers rather. And then that Maven AI strategy, just for those listings where you're really trying to maximize that margin and kind of balance out the sales velocity, have helped a lot of folks kind of switch some listings from Maven to a buy box strategy now, kind of in line with what we were talking about earlier, trying to free up some cash for this upcoming Q4 stretch. But for now, Maven definitely still the best option for generating as much profit/margin on those listings for you. And
you also get, instead of 1 marketplace, you get 2. So you double up your marketplaces. So if you are also selling in, Mexico or Canada, you can also add that now. Not a big deal as well. So awesome. Glad to see that. Prince, can you recommend books for founders? Oh, see, Prince has been listening. Language matters. Some good books for founders. Yes. I wish I had my library in here so I could just quickly pull these for you. The first one that I'm a big fan of is High Output Management by Andy Grove, or is it Doer? It's by Andy. He was the Intel guy. Fantastic book for how to manage teams, KPIs, stuff like that. I think it's fantastic. Peter Thiel's 0 to 1 is highly recommended for founders. That's mainly for like startups, like creating something brand new from scratch. It's still an incredible read because it just kind of shifts how you make decisions and how you're thinking about things, which I think is really advantageous no matter what. So those 2 are amazing. And I always recommend Work the System by Sam Carpenter. Get it for free. I think it's on like this 8th edition at this point. He keeps updating it, which is cool. This book, Work the System, if you're familiar with eMyth Revisited, everybody recommends that book. I think that book is overhyped. It is a good introductory to this concept of working on the business, not in the business kind of stuff. But to me, it's a little too philosophical. It's not tangible enough to me. Work the System is the tangible version of eMyth Revisited, which I think is just absolutely fantastic. And it shows you how to actually build processes. It shows you how to actually view the business from a machine perspective and be able to zoom in and zoom out and solve these different problems. And it takes you through a journey of the author who ran a call center. I think he still does run it. Basically, he bought the company and it all went downhill. He's sleeping in the office. It's horrible. He's doing everything. And eventually it dawns on him, I need to fix these problems. And he started to work the system. And by work the system, he means create the systems. And then eventually he's able to say, okay, there's a better way to do every one of these processes. And now that I have it documented, I can hand that over to somebody else. The reason why, and I kind of just explained the book right there, but the reality of it is seeing examples really changes how this information impacts you. That's why when people are like, why are books so long, when like really the whole concept is on 2 pages? It needs to get the point across. It needs to give you narrative so that you can put it into context. If I just give you a little pithy answer, sounds lovely, but did it do anything? Did it resonate? Probably not. It's actually a pretty fast read, but that is one of my favorite books that I like to go back to time and time again. Trying to think if there's anything else that really, I mean, there's a ton. I would say start with those 3. Start with those 3. I think you'll be in a really good position. Another one, we wrote a blog post on this, the Checklist Manifesto. So once you read Work the System by Sam Carpenter, the next book you should read, kind of in that same subject line, is going to be the Checklist Manifesto by Dr. Atul Gawande. That book is amazing. Very small book, very to the point, but basically taking that same systems approach, and he applied what he was seeing with like F1 pit crews who were consistently getting faster and faster and higher quality, and then applying that to being a doctor, which is so interesting. You're right. And he talks about how planes don't really crash that often. Well, why is that? If you actually watch a pilot, there's so many checklists they have to go through to ensure that that does not occur. And there's a bunch of fallbacks. I mean, these pilots' checkbooks are massive. They're thick. Obviously, you don't get to that point, but he illustrates the importance of following checklists, even for yourself. I mean, when I was doing support for the first 2.5 years as a founder, I didn't know what I was doing. And I was actually writing documentation for myself before we even had anybody else that was being hired. Now that was for me, but what's nice is when we hired Finn, he already came in with a ton of documentation. And it's like, cool, like here's the starting point. Here's a foundation of things I've already created. Now you go and make it better, right? Second pair of eyes, all these different things. And so that book, highly recommend reading. It's absolutely phenomenal. But Casey, any books you want to highlight? I feel like you and I don't talk too much. I know you're a big movie guy, though.
Yeah, I do love a good movie. I tend to sit down and enjoy something over a 2.5 hour period, over 8 or 9 hour period of reading an actual book. With that being said, I don't have any direct recommendations in the founder side of things, Prince. I've read, a lot of my background is in sales, so I have a couple different sales books. I was just trying to Google. There was one specifically that I can't remember what it was called. There was a specific or technical term for this type of selling. I'll have to follow up. No, there was a certain one where it was like, it's kind of like you, I mean, this is very in sales. It's like you kind of create problems that your own solution solves. And then if someone else like decides to go with a different company or a different solution, you kind of look at their solution and you say, hey, this could lead to these problems for you, just so you know, not necessarily looking for a sale or a close there. And then they kind of creates more kind of a bond outside of the context of the sale between the individuals. And then that leads to more trust, longer relationships, things like that. Another book that I really like is Gap Selling by Keenan something. I'm looking at it on Google right now. Can't quite see who the author is. It just says it's by Keenan. But that was another good one, kind of finding those areas where you can kind of slip in. But those won't necessarily come into play for you founders. Maybe if you're on the negotiation side with any manufacturers or things of that nature. But I always recommend just communicating as clearly as possible, because I feel like most sales objections are either due to cost, which is somewhat unavoidable, or B, a lack of understanding. So I always recommend just leveling with whoever you're working with, getting on the same page with them as much as you can, and then going from there. A lot of times folks are hesitant to make a purchase or an agreement, and they'll say, I just need more time, when in reality, they need more information. Like, they don't really need more time. If you're the best source of information, just call that out and say, hey, I'm going to be your best source of information. Let's get everything out on the table now. And then if you do still need more time afterwards, then we can cross that bridge when we get there. So
yeah, I'm glad you brought those up, because I get asked a lot about sales books. And I never really learned sales from books. I was a personal trainer, and just like wholesale, you think you're doing wholesale, you're actually doing sales. Same thing with being a personal trainer. Most of my time was actually doing sales. And the GM at the time, Delta Force guy, so very intimidating, was real hard on sales. And so we would sit down and do role playing. So he'd sit down, in a cubicle with me and be like, cool, I'm a 50-year-old divorced woman. Here's my objection, go. And we would just practice this, right? Role playing is so impactful. It's the most uncomfortable thing ever, but it's how you get in reps. So I learned a lot from like just doing and sucking at it for a long period of time, but also just watching people on YouTube explain different frameworks, or, listen in on like live calls to see how people do it in reality. Like that pattern recognition starts to kick in for you a little bit. I don't have anybody that comes top of mind because it's been a hot minute, but doing that and then just doing sales helps. You know what I mean? It's one of those things. It's like, I can explain how to ride a bike, but you kind of need to you jump on the bike to figure it out for the most part. Because you can feel like you know everything when you read a bunch of books on sales, but the moment you hit that, somebody picks up the phone, all goes away. Now it's just muscle memory. You got to be able to think fast and kind of handle those things. But I've always struggled with that question of what sales books do you recommend? I'm like, I really don't have any that I have read that have helped. It's just been putting in reps and things of that nature.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely recommend that gap selling. And yeah, it is one of those skills where you do need to just kind of get out there and do it. I think back to my days of starting in sales when I was ripping up to, I think it was 80 to 90 cold calls a day. And which is tough. I mean, you're making 50 calls, no one picks up, and then someone does pick up and you got to kind of just scramble from there. But yeah, it's really interesting how I think like honesty is not something that all salespeople use. And that was something that I used to really just level the playing field and get on the same page. Specifically, there is one example where folks are like, hey, like they're complaining about like this doesn't work and this solution doesn't work for that reason and XYZ. And you go, hey, then maybe we're not a good fit. And then you just put it back on them. And then they kind of convince themselves, well, you do have this, that, the other thing that makes me want to work with you guys. It's like, all right, well then if that outweighs the downfalls, then let's kind of keep the conversation going. So, and one thing I would recommend, one thing that was super helpful to me in my sales past is we would record all of our calls, and once a week, someone on the team, you'd do a huge call review with the whole team, which is very intimidating. You have your whole sales team kind of nitpicking what you did right, what you did wrong, where you could have done better. Harder to simulate on your own, but I would recommend if you have a recorder or something, just record the conversation and then you can listen to it after and just find some areas where you can maybe try something different or improve a little bit. That's always going to help.
Yeah. See, Prince, thank you so much. Just hired my first in-person employee. Major congrats. That's huge. In addition to my current 2 remote workers. And I just read a pretty interesting book on leadership titled $1 Trillion Coach. Yes, actually, this has been on my to-read list. I've heard amazing things about it. If anything stands out, Prince, throw it in the comment section. Because I have this problem where I buy too many books and then try to read 4 in parallel and just jump around based on my interests at the moment. So I have a never-ending list of books to read. See, Tony, I haven't gone over your Q4 prep email earlier this week, but could you give some quick tips? Yeah, so high level, you really want to be thinking about your inventory, right? You need to be forecasting how are things going to change, right? And how much access to inventory you have. If you're doing RA, you have limited access, so it doesn't apply as much, but things like OA, you need to be tripling down on things that work, cutting back on things that don't work. For wholesale, very much the same thing. You need to really think about how you're doing capital allocation, meaning how are you intentionally not buying things that are profitable to buy more things that are more profitable, right? You can't just buy everything unless you just have crazy amounts of capital, in which case, yeah, you should do that. But most people are not in that case. So that's number one. Especially with the wholesale, like I mentioned at the beginning of the conversation, you need to be able to place preemptive orders, right? Call them a back ordered order or POs with your brands, because they need to be able to also forecast their manufacturing. That's going to be a big lead time problem. What can happen, which has happened to me, is they're like, yeah, we'll sell you whatever we have, but guess what? We don't have anything. And it's going to take 2 months for manufacturing to get caught up before it's even at our warehouse before I can sell you anything. That leaves you in a really bad position. But if your brands or your distributors that you're working with have enough lead time to get through manufacturing and forecast themselves correctly, you're going to be in a good position. But if you've been ordering 10 grand a month from a brand A and you out of nowhere place an $80,000 order with them, they may or may not be able to fulfill that. And that becomes a big problem. And you're kind of breaking your pattern, right? When you're doing forecasting, you're looking at the data. Well, if I know you always submit $10,000 orders once a month and we haven't gone through a Q4 together, I can't forecast you. Now I can make some general assumptions, but I also, as the brand, don't want to end up with too much inventory myself, because that also costs me money. But if they know that they have orders on the docket, so to speak, they can very easily be like, yeah, ramp up manufacturing because I've already got orders to fulfill. It's an easy margin for me. So they're able to increase their order volume on their end. You really want to think about supply logistics, right? Which is like not very sexy, but the reality of it is you need to be thinking through what's the supply kind of, lineage here, right? And be able to understand, okay, well, if they get backed up and they can't fulfill, I can't get what I need. So I need to let them know well ahead of time. Another thing, especially for wholesale and definitely for brands, you need to be thinking about listing optimization. Like, you really need to think about how to well position things, because people will be using Amazon as a search tool. I've said this time and time again, Amazon is a search engine that happens to search e-commerce products, right? So you need to be thinking through those things. Are your listings, especially if you're, again, doing wholesale, it makes sense to do this. If you're doing super wide RAOA, it probably makes less sense time-wise for you to do this. But things where you're really going deep on inventory, you need to be thinking about how to position the listing correctly to take advantage of the increased demand. Another thing is PPC. PPC is not super crazy to do. I mean, you could do simple discovery campaigns that are running auto, keywords, and you're just removing, basically adding negative keywords that just don't make sense, that cropped up. Things like that are really going to start to kind of help. And if you're doing any kind of promotions, again, I never really did a ton of promotions on the wholesale side. RAOA, you're definitely not going to be doing that, in my opinion. Correct me if anybody here is. But that's like the high level stuff, right? But primarily, your sole focus needs to be your inventory and just making sure you're well positioned. I would rather you have a little bit of inventory left over than to run out of inventory. Running out of inventory sounds nice. You're like, oh, I sold everything and no liability here. We're good. But the problem is you might have missed 60% of the opportunity here. And so by having, 10% of your inventory left over going into Q1, not a bad situation at all. That means you really maximize the opportunity. So think through that. And again, lean on your past data. If you've already gone through Q4, go look at the data of that period of time and see what worked and what didn't work. And then take that information and be like, all right, cool. I'm doing wholesale. I've added a bunch of new brands. What categories really did well for me? Let me focus a lot of my capital on inventory there and less so on categories that really didn't prosper that much during Q4. Perfect. Not a problem. But you can also forecast that volume really well. If you know that you did 80% of your sales in Q4, you need to prepare for that. And unfortunately, this is a capital intensive business. And so you need to be able to have that much capital at the ready, right? Now, this is where you really want to start considering things like net 30, net 60, net 90 terms with your wholesale brands and distributors, if that's available to you. Otherwise, maybe it does make sense to get an Amazon loan, right? That interest rate for a short period of time, if you're only using it for Q4 ramp up and you're spending it based on, again, data-driven decisions, you're not just spending it because it looks profitable. It's because you have data to back up that decision. I think you're in a pretty good position to be able to do that. And that's like at a very high level, how to think about going into Q4 outside of tactics and short-term things. That's really what the blog post goes over, but a little bit more in depth, obviously.
Yeah, and I think we've talked about it a lot on various office hours over the last few months, is that everything does boil down to quality inventory. Obviously, the best buy you can make is going to let you have the best margins possible, the most advantageous min and max prices, et cetera, on that front. And I would definitely kind of double down on your sentiment of, it's not the worst thing if you have 10, maybe 15% inventory left over at the end. That's why you have repricers. You can liquidate, break even on those things after the big rush. So yeah, I would definitely agree that it's better to have a little too much than too few items, just because everyone's purchasing. The sales velocity on almost every category and brand is going to go through the roof in November and December. So better to just be in a strong spot there and then can adjust post Q4 if you need to kind of fine tune, maybe make a little bit less margin or break even on the remaining inventory there.
Yeah. Great question though, Tony. I'm glad you brought that up. So we have a little bit more time left over. So any questions anybody has, again, we're happy to dive deep into anything here. You know, I'm going to geek out no matter what. Love going down rabbit holes. So anything specific anybody wants to go over, happy to dive deep into that.
Or if anyone has any success stories or things they might do differently following Prime Day. Hopefully you all had a very successful Prime Day, regardless of how you were approaching it. But would be interested to hear if you guys performed well, if there were some things you wish you did better, and maybe how we can troubleshoot that or give some advice for maybe next year's Prime Day or leading into Q4 as well.
Yeah. And if you didn't basically lock yourself in your house during 48 hours of Prime Days, you might have missed out. The amount of money I saw spent just on my timeline was astronomical. Yeah, it's great for sales, but it's also great for getting discounted products doing OA. OA is absolutely incredible because a lot of brands a lot of brands know that there's going to be increased search and demand for discounted products on Prime Day. So people kind of piggyback off of Amazon's Prime Day. And so you end up getting additional discounts and things of that nature with your regular OA kind of suppliers, for lack of a better term, sites, I guess. But it was pretty great. So you spend a lot, you make a lot. It's pretty exciting. I kind of miss those days, to be honest. I miss having these crazy days where you're just refreshing Seller Central every 5 minutes. You're like, more sales, more sales, more sales. Talk about like the old the lever for gambling, that domain hit or a dopamine hit. Sorry. Just absolutely insane. Yeah. Tony, I bought 10K up in Lego. Love that.
Great investment.
Yeah. I was going to ask actually, are these short-term flips for you? Or are these going to be like long-term hold investments for you? Cause I've been seeing a lot more on the Lego side of things. It's something I haven't personally dove into as a seller, but I'm seeing a lot more people, not even in the Amazon world, but just being able to buy these for long-term holds and investments. And it's really interesting. I see the returns are pretty impressive. So I'm curious to throw that into chat for us.
Yeah, the margins are always pretty thick on Lego from my experience. I've recently kind of got back into Legos. I've got Millennium Falcon. I've got a couple Star Wars ships, and now I have a new one that's it's one of the sets from like the original Indiana Jones movie when he goes into the pit with all the snakes. So I have to like build that, but I might wait till I move so I can find a designated spot for it and set it up there. But yeah.
Nice. Yeah, I probably have 100K in inventory, hold 2 to 3 years, and then sell after retirement dates. Okay, yeah. I've been seeing people basically post like, these are the things that are going to go out, basically discontinue this year. These are the good long-term investments. That makes a lot of sense. That's cool.
Yeah.
Casey, this one's for you here. Top 3 movies. This is gonna be tough. I'm excited.
That is a tough one.
I always get asked my top 3 books, and I'm always like, oh gosh.
Yeah, top 3 movies. That's a great question, Tony. For me, I'll stay away from kind of some of the typical answers. I think Shawshank Redemption and Godfather are kind of always in that conversation. For me, I really love LA Confidential. I think that is one of the best adaptations from book into film. I also really love The Departed.
So fun fact, where the chief guy gets dropped on the pavement from the roof.
Yeah.
I walked on that sidewalk every day to go to my apartment in Boston. I was like, wait, this looks so familiar. And I was watching it one day and I paused. I was like, oh my God, that's like a block away from my apartment. That's so sick.
Yeah. That is one of the fun things of that movie. And that's why I like it so much. Just living in Boston for so long, you kind of pick up different landmarks in different areas where things were filmed.
So much that is supposedly taking place in New York, but it always takes place in Boston. So if you've ever watched Free Guy with Ryan Reynolds, the bank that he walks into, the Golden Doors, that's our building to our office.
Yeah.
Which is like dumbfounding.
Yeah, I did notice that. And Boston's done a lot over the last few years to become a more advantageous city to film in. So there's been a lot more movies in general being filmed there. The Instigators, which comes out on Apple Plus in a few weeks. It's a Matt Damon, Casey Affleck movie that was filmed entirely in Boston. I was actually walking around and saw them filming a car chase where a cop was driving down the street. So that's really cool. But third favorite movie, Tony, just to wrap it up, I'll go with Saving Private Ryan today. That might change at any point. But that's an amazing movie. I think that's super well done.
Good choice.
But yeah,
I'm a big
it'll be
Wes
interesting.
Anderson guy, though.
Mhm.
I'm
Yeah,
obsessed with Wes Anderson.
yeah, Grand Budapest Hotel, I think, is his best, and that hovers in my top 20, depending on the mood
Yeah,
and what's been going on.
so good.
But
Let's see. The crazy thing value wise, so going back to the Legos, is the minifigures that are exclusives make the sets rare slash collectible. That's so cool.
mhm.
You guys got me wanting to can you use them though? Like, can you build them and they're still valuable, or do they lose value if they're opened?
I mean, Tony's probably the expert here. I don't think they
Yeah.
lose much value because you can still build them at any point.
Yeah.
It's not like it's an action figure that then is gonna get scratched up or whatever. But
Right.
I'd be interesting, Tony, if most people leave things in the box or if they build them, and like I use mine as like display pieces once they're built. But
Yeah. Nice. Going back to the $1 trillion coach, Prince is saying, approach of unusual generosity. It builds trust, fosters teamwork, and builds loyalty, and it's just the right thing to do. I always come back to this like karmic approach, right? It's like if you're just putting out good stuff and you just deeply care and you're not really keeping the score, you're good. There's a book called Never Eat Alone by Keith Ferrazzi. When you're talking like networking, and we wrote a blog post on this too, because I read that book. I struggle with networking because the term has a lot of connotations.
Mhm.
But Keith really breaks down what it really is. And it's basically this, right? It's the same. So you hear this philosophy time and time again, just deeply care about people and help them achieve what they want to achieve. And that will come back to you. And yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense. It's why when people reach out being like, hey, like I've got a small group, there's only 10 people in it, probably not worth your time. But if you're ever interested in like presenting or, talking with our group, we'd love to. I'm always like, yes. I don't care if there's one person, I'll do it. Right. Cause like, why not? I have nothing to lose here. And that's one other person who gets to hear, about Aura. So yeah, I'm always down for it. So see, Tony,
yeah,
I do sealed sets. Okay.
another good book on your point there, Prince, kind of the honesty approach, kind of what I was talking about, leveling with folks. Another good book is People Buy You by Jeb Blunt. Very kind of just goes super deep into that concept. And that's where I found a lot of my success in sales, kind of just being being honest and leveling with people. So yeah, I would definitely recommend that if you're liking that approach. Absolutely.
Nice. Rounders is one of my favorite movies. Damon Norton. I've never seen Rounders actually.
Oh, it's
That's good.
It's my favorite poker movie. Yeah, it's
Okay.
very very gritty. It's funny. The writers were on one of my favorite movie podcasts, and they talked about they were stuck in their day to day, weren't really liking it, and they just dedicated, hey, we're going to write a script 1 hour a day, every day, just doesn't
That's
matter.
crazy.
And then 18 months after they started doing that, they were on set filming, and now they're both full-time screenwriters. So
that's cool. I like I have a weird penchant for nerdy 80s films and hacker 80s films.
yeah,
So like the movie Hackers, just
I was gonna say War Games, probably.
Absolutely. Even the remake was amazing, but the OGs is so good. Sneakers is one that gets not talked about as much because it's less like hacker and more like phone freaking, which is like the precursor to hacking, social engineering and stuff. So, just great. It's really cool. See, Tony, again, if they are not sealed, people worry about missing and or fake minifigures. Okay, so that makes sense. So I imagine they would have a little bit of a hit on valuation because they've been, unsealed. That's kind of what my assumption would be. But that's cool.
Sense. Yeah,
that would be my issue. I'd want to build them,
yeah. It is tough. It is tough. And Tony, if you like Rounders, if you're looking for another good poker movie, Mississippi Grind is a good one with Ryan Reynolds not doing his typical kind of goofy thing and blanking on the name of the other guy, but that's kind of a good gritty gambling poker movie as well.
Yeah. See, fun fact, my FBA business is 90% DVDs. I'm also a collector and have to try not to get high on my own supply. Love that. I dislike used media or just media period for FBA. It's like used books, right? It's got its own problems, man. It's there's a lot of API limitations that make it just really difficult to reprice. So from a repricing standpoint, I don't like them. From a sales, I went and used books for a little while. There's a tool, I forget what it's called. I don't think it exists anymore, but it would basically like act like tactical arbitrage, but just for books, and it would just find like deltas on like Chegg and stuff like that. I spent maybe $1,000 on books, and like they just all sat forever. I was like, this sucks, man. Was not a huge fan. Nice hair, Dylan. Thanks. Yeah, I'm growing it out. I've always wanted to. It's really curly and wavy.
You got some nice Cheeto curls right in the front there,
dude. Yeah, man. I put a little something in it this morning, just so so it doesn't get all afro-y, because if I don't, it'll dry out. And yeah, I got some freaking crazy curls. I'm deciding if I'm gonna let it keep growing or start to pull it back, but it's lengthy right now. It's great.
Yeah, there's always that awkward phase when you're growing hair out. You got to kind of just power through it, but
yeah, exactly. And don't say that I just upgraded to the annual plan. It depends. It definitely depends, Prince. It's not all media. It's just, as having been a seller, was not a huge fan. See, it seems Amazon has really nerfed used books. Yeah. And I always say with a grain of salt, like, just because I don't like something doesn't mean it's bad. There are 8-figure sellers doing every business model you could ever imagine, including writing Kindle books. So it's not that it's not possible to succeed with it. That's always the case. It's just like, for me, I'm a very lazy person. So I'm like, I don't want to do it the easy way. You know what I mean? I always think about like ROI on time, and it's just easier to scale wholesale. Once you understand the skill set. OA now, I was horrible with OA, man. Back when I tried it, there's just hardly any data or software to really help. And so I felt like I was really just flying blind, and it was really difficult. But now I feel like dramatically more accessible to most people, if you really understand it and use the right software. But for me, I didn't really love RA either. That's a grind too, having to go and just scan. I mean, I'd spend 10 hours just scanning stuff. I'm like, man, what could I have done with that same 10 hours? I could have called like 50 brands or distributors and gotten accounts, like, it's just not that RA is bad, right? I always tell people, like, pick a model that makes sense for you and your skill sets. I don't like to grind things out. I don't like repetitive things. I have ADD. I don't love that. But having conversations, building relationships, that kind of strategy level stuff, I love doing. And I already had the sales skill set a bit, being a personal trainer. So it made sense for me. So that's why I did better with it than RA, OA. But some people, man, I'm like, don't go to wholesale. You are crushing it with OA, not even with your time. Like, just keep going until you're just hitting your capacity, and then maybe consider it. But like, you're crushing this. No sense in changing it over. Let's see, Tony. I think mainly software for OA is only inventory based, not so much a magic decoder ring to profitable products. Yeah, that's the hard part, right? There's been a lot of companies trying to build basically that of, hey, we'll just scan a bunch of stuff and find you the deals. And it always falls beneath expectations, which is frustrating, right? Because it feels like, cool, like this is going to make it so much easier. And that just ends up not being the case. I think, yeah, OA is less about the software side of things, although, Keepa's gotten dramatically better over the last decade. And even like Flip Alert I've been seeing amazing things from Saul's, user base. He just recently launched that. That's been really awesome to see, and seeing how much people are spending per day using that software is pretty interesting. So I'm very hopeful and optimistic about that world, but I just think that the way it's previously been attempted is just using really old tech that, web scraping and stuff like that, where it doesn't really add up. I think you need a fundamentally new approach to pull this off. This is why I keep pointing people towards AI agents, because I think that does make this possible. It's just going to be complicated to build. The components exist. It's just building it out correctly. And it's going to take some time to refine and stuff, but we'll see. So awesome. We got a few more minutes here, and then we'll start to wrap up for time. Again, appreciate everybody jumping in here and spending some time with us and asking some really great questions. This has been phenomenal. See, I feel like Keepa is a necessary tool to prevent bad buys, which makes it a tremendous app. You basically can't be a seller without Keepa. That's just a fact. When Keepa started charging money, because it used to be free, people were like, "Oh, what do we do?" I was like, "You pay the money. What do you mean? You don't have a choice here. Like, it's either don't do the business and fly blind, or pay $100. It's worth it."
It's like being out on the open sea without a compass. You really need Keepa to just point you in the right direction. Kind of like you said, Tony, just to prevent bad buys. Obviously, finding good buys is still a little bit of an art form in itself, but just having something that can immediately hold up a red flag for you to let you know, hey, maybe stay away from this product, at least for now. It's just, like you said, it's insurance on bad buys, and it also speeds up your process for having to kind of continually do that research over and over again.
Exactly. So any last minute questions? If not, we'll wrap up here. And again, appreciate everybody jumping in with us. And we do this every week, right? So just as if you're brand new and you just saw this, awesome, welcome. We do this every Wednesday from 2 p.m. to 3 p.m. EST, just live office hours. Casey and I just jump in and answer any questions you have related to kind of any topic in the seller world. Obviously, love jumping into Aura feedback there. How do you use certain features, things of that nature. But yeah, we just kind of geek out. Just wanted to say I love Maven, and Maven loves you. No, appreciate that. That's awesome. That's definitely a passion of ours, definitely something that we spend a lot of time building out and thinking through. And, with it being still V1 of it, we're just very grateful that, we built it the way we did and that it's been well received. It's been absolutely fantastic. So I appreciate that, Manav. Awesome. So with that, we'll let everybody get back to the rest of their week. Again, thank you so much for joining us here. We do this every week, every Wednesday, as I just mentioned. But we'd love to have you back again next week, and send this to a friend, to a seller friend. Let us help them as
Absolutely.
well.
Yeah.
Casey, any last words on your end?
Yeah, just a couple announcements. We'll be doing office hours as usual next week at the same time, 2 to 3 p.m. And then we are doing like a team building, team training exercise next week. So there will be limited support hours. Still going to be Monday through Friday, just from 11 a.m. to 3 p.m. there. So we'll get in there, help you answer any of your problems. But if you do come in outside of those hours, you can expect those responses to come in that next window there. And then typical support hours will resume a week from this coming Monday, which is the first Monday in August. I'm not sure what that date is off the top of my head. But just to let you folks know there, we'll still make sure you're all squared away and taken care of just within those limited hours. And we'll return to the regular or the normal support hours that following week.
Yeah. And I'll send out an email probably tomorrow or Friday with all that breakdown as well. Yep. Awesome. Cool. Awesome. Well, everybody enjoy the rest of your week. Bye.
All right. Adios, folks.